The Lord be with you. A reading from the Holy Gospel according to John. Jesus went to the Mount of Olives, but early in the morning he arrived again at the temple area, and all the people started coming to him, and he sat down and taught them. Then the scribes and the Pharisees brought a woman who had been caught in adultery and made her stand in the middle. They said to him, "Teacher, this woman was caught in the very act of committing adultery. Now, in the law, Moses commanded us to stone such women. So what do you say?" They said this to test him, so that they could have some charge to bring against him. Jesus bent down and began to write on the ground with his finger. But when they continued asking him, he straightened up and said to them, "Let the one among you who is without sin be the first to throw a stone at her." Again he bent down and wrote on the ground. And in response, they went away, one by one, beginning with the elders. So he was left alone with the woman before him. Then Jesus straightened up and said to her, "Woman, where are they? Has no one condemned you?" She replied, "No one, sir." Then Jesus said, "Neither do I condemn you. Go, and from now on, do not sin anymore." My brothers and sisters, the gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord Jesus Christ.
Dr. A.J. Cronin was a very famous physician in Scotland, though the English like to claim he was British. Well, he wasn't. He was born in Glasgow and he was educated at the University of Glasgow and became a doctor. Eventually, he opened a practice in London, but then ill health took over and he had to retire from being a physician, but he turned to writing and he became a very famous novelist, A.J. Cronin. You want to see one of his books turned into a movie, then you see The Keys of the Kingdom with one of my favorite actors, Gregory Peck. He tells the story one evening in a hospital in London. A young boy was brought into the hospital very, very ill, suffering from diphtheria. He put a tube in his throat in order to help him to breathe. And he told the nurse to sit there all night and from time to time to clean the tube. Well, she fell asleep. And when she woke up, the tube was blocked. She panicked, didn't follow instructions. She called the doctor. He rushed to the hospital. The little boy was dead. He was absolutely furious. So he sat down and he wrote a letter to the board recommending that she be expelled from the hospital. That night he went home. He couldn't sleep, thinking of the little boy. And the words, "Forgive us our trespasses," seemed to take possession of him. So the very next morning he went back to the hospital. He went to his office and threw the letter of recommendation in the basket. Then he called her in. She was slim, worn. She was from Wales. There was silence. And eventually she pleaded out with him, "Give me a second chance. Give me a second chance." And he did. Years later, she was the head nurse of one of the most important hospitals in England, and she became a very famous nurse. Second chance, third chance, fourth chance, fifth chance, the chances that God gives to us. Somebody once wrote a letter to Anne Landers, and I have to tell you, I used to read her column. And I think I should have it here. Let me see. Sorry, I can't find it. But anyway, the letter was from a woman who suspected that her husband was having a foreign affair, let's put it that way. She didn't trust him. She even went to the extremes of getting a detective to follow her husband around and so on. And he couldn't find anything. So eventually she went to the lawyer, and the lawyer said to her, "Forget it. Put your faith in yourself. Your husband doesn't deserve it. And the only one who is committing adultery is your lawyer." Any lawyers here? I hope not. I know I'll be in trouble. I'll be sued for the defamation of character. The poor woman in this evening's gospel, by the way, you notice there's no mention whatsoever of the Johns. No mention of it. But these dirty old men, they drag her before the Lord. Of course, they knew the law, punishment by execution. And so they bring her in, and she stands there before the Lord, I'm sure in terror. She knew she was guilty, and she knew what the punishment was. So Jesus is caught between a rock and a hard place. He believes in the mercy of God, but he also has to uphold the law that it was a sin against humanity and against social stability. So as far as he is concerned, he must condemn her. But notice what he does. He bends down and he begins to write on the sand a second time. Now, we don't know or speculate about what we wrote, but I think we have a very good idea. Because he then says to these old men that the person without sin be the first to throw the stone. These self-righteous gentlemen, totally oblivious to their own sins, wanted this poor woman to be executed. And notice how Jesus treats her with compassion and gentleness. He doesn't condemn her. He doesn't castigate her. He doesn't punish her. But he also insists that it is a sin. And he gives her hope by saying to her, go now and don't sin again. There's a wonderful lesson there for all of us, because we too can be like these old men. We can be like the Pharisees. We can be self-righteous and look down on the poor unwed mother, on the AIDS patient, on the drug addict, on the alcoholic, the woman who steals at Walmart. We can be righteous too, forgetting that we are all sinners and people can throw stones at all of us. So we should be the last to dare to pick up a stone and throw it at any other of our hurting brothers and sisters. You know, the famous painting, I think I talked about this, was it last week, The Prodigal Son? And it's, of course, by Rembrandt, and it's in the famous museum in St. Petersburg, the Hermitage. But the picture of this one is also in the Hermitage. It's painted by a German painter called Lucas Cranach. You should Google it sometime. Because Jesus is in the very front of the picture with the woman. She's standing there, her eyes closed. She's very young. She's forlorn, and he is standing beside her. And the painting captures that moment when he looks at these old men in the eyes and challenges them to throw the first stone. She is standing on his left, very young, as I said, forlorn, her eyes closed. She is not bowed down, as one would expect. And remarkably, her face is almost leaning on the face on the left shoulder of Jesus. And remarkably, her right hand is down by her side, and her fingers are entwined in Jesus' fingers in a gesture of love, forgiveness, and compassion. That, you see, is our model. That's the standard that Jesus sets for all of us. That's the standard. And we know we fail from time to time. But the other side of the story, the compassion and mercy that the Lord extended to this fallen woman, he extends to each and every one of us. Not twice, not second time, third time, fourth time, fifth time, but as many times as we want. And that should be our example also to our erring brothers and sisters.